Hi folks, welcome to my next video on DNS and DHCP on a Windows server. So in my last video I showed how to get Windows Server 2022 installed and running step by step, and at this stage you should have that Windows Server up and running. And I'm going to take you to the next level where we're going to configure DNS and install DHCP. So this diagram is showing that we have a number of hosts connected to a switch and our Windows Server connected to the same switch. We also have a switch, the switch connected to a router, and we have some IP addresses indicated in the drawing. I'm running this in a virtual environment where my gateway is 192.168.3.2. and my Windows Server is 192.168.3.5. The hosts have not been configured yet, but I'm showing here 192.168.3.20 as an example. So let's go to our Windows Server and set up DNS. So why do we need DNS? Well, we need to resolve names to IP addresses. This host, when it's looking for other hosts on the same network, we want this host to access this DNS server. If it goes out to the internet, this internet DNS server is not going to know our local hosts. Only our local DNS server will know our local hosts. So our host A should be pointing to this Windows server as its DNS. So when it's asking what's the IP address of host B, this will know the answer to that. When it asks what's the IP address of something external like Microsoft.com or Cisco.com, well, this DNS server doesn't know the answer to that because it's only looking at the internal servers. This is why we need an external DNS or a forwarder. So this DNS server will forward requests externally to say, oh, I don't have that in my local network. I'm going to forward that request externally and find the answer to that. We're going to configure that right now. So we're going to switch over to our server. On our Windows Server, you can see that we've got the server manager up and running. And on the left-hand side, there are a number of tabs: dashboard, local server, all servers, ADDS, DNS, file and storage services. These are all installed by default, and they were installed in my previous video. If you wanted to know how to do that, just click on my previous video. So we need to configure DNS for our local environment. We're going to click on this DNS tab here, and on the right hand side you can see our server comes up. We're going to right click on our server, and then a menu pops up. This is the one we want. Halfway down, the DNS manager. We want to left click on that. Alternatively, you could also access it through Start, Admin Tools, and DNS. So it's right there as well. I'm just going to go and right click on DNS manager, and it pulls up this window. Now I'm going to maximize it, and I'm going to expand out the first pane. And you'll notice right now it looks blank, but there's stuff there. So we need to double click on this server, and it expands out all of our folders. Now the forward lookup zone is what we're interested in, but first we have to do our configuration. So we're going to right click on our server. So make sure you right click on the server, and then we want to go down to properties, and a number of tabs show up. Well, we're not concerned about most of these tabs at this stage, but we are concerned about the forwarder. So we want to make sure that we are pointing to an external DNS server. In this case, I've already set it up, but I'm going to show you how to set it up from scratch. So I'm going to delete this one. You can see that there's no forwarder at this stage. So we're going to go ahead and add that. We're going to add that one back in. Click enter or click anywhere. and you can see that it's added it back into the list and it's validated it. So we're going to click OK, and it's back in our list, so we can click OK. Now we know that if it can't resolve anywhere, it's going to go out there. Well, where is it resolving it from? That's in our forward lookup zone. If we double click on our forward lookup zone, our local domain is right here. We'll double click on that, and you can see a listing of all the hosts on this local domain. You can see that it's using 192.168.3.5 and the server name. So anytime any host requests the IP address of WinServer01, it will come here. It will look at this zone, and it will find this address and return that setting. If you ever add workstations to the domain, they will automatically be added to this list. You can also manually add hosts into here by right-clicking and going into New Host or A Record. And you would type in host A, and you could give it an address 192.168.3.20. Now, we don't want to do that because ours will be automatically added, so we don't want to manually add any hosts unless it's absolutely necessary. But it's there if you need it. I'm going to cancel that, and we're going to close DNS. So our DNS is working and it's configured. This server needs to point to itself, to its own DNS, because when this is the server itself, if it surfs the net, well, it only has its own record. So we want this server to also use an external DNS server when it can't find something on its own machine. So we're going to go into back into local server, back into Ethernet, right click on the Ethernet adapter, left click properties, and we're concerned about this Internet Protocol version 4 here. Double click or click properties. You can see our IP address is already set. It's a static IP address, not automatic. And it's right now set to the loopback, which is fine. But I'm going to set it to 192.168.3.5, which is the same as our own server. So it's going to look for all DNS entries locally. But if for some reason our DNS fails, our service fails, Windows updates make something go wrong, well, we need to have an alternative just in case. So we're going to put in 8.8.8.8 here and click OK and click OK and close this window. Now our local server is also configured to point to our own DNS server, and our own DNS server has a forwarder. So everything is completed. Now we're going to open up command prompt by clicking on Start CMD. Open a command prompt. We'll type in ipconfig/all to check our settings. We can see that our DNS server is now 192.168.3.5, and we have a backup DNS server. So we want to make sure that the name resolution is working here. And the easiest way to do that is just to ping any address. In this case, I'm going to ping google.ca. We're not concerned about the response. We're only concerned, does it respond with a number, the IP address, when we do this. So we're going to click OK. And it responded back with 142.250.217.67. So that's telling us that the DNS forwarder is working correctly. We could double check. We could try another one. We could try cisco.com. And it also finds an IP address. So we have success. Our DNS is fully functioning, and we can close this window and go back to our dashboard. Now in part 2 of this video, we are going to set up a DHCP server. So let me go back to my drawing for a moment. Why do we need DHCP? Well, these hosts, when we set them up, they need an IP address, they need a gateway, they need settings. If we statically assign these settings, it's tedious, it's time consuming, and we could make mistakes. So we don't want to manually set up IP addresses for hosts. We do for servers, we don't for hosts. So these hosts should be going to look for a local DNS or DHCP server, which is right here. So we want to install and configure a local DHCP. Also take note of the range of IP addresses that we want to give. So this in this case, the subnet is 192.168.3, and the host cannot start with 2, can't start with 1 or 2 or 0. So we could start with maybe 3. We could start with really any number past the router. In this case, we've got the server set as host number .5. So we might want to make the range larger than that so that we don't use the same range that we've got on the server. So let's go back to the server. We are going to click on Add Roles and Features. Now this screen is not very helpful. It's just an introductory screen that comes up every time. We want to skip this screen so when we go back and make changes, we don't see this window. Click on Next. We do want to leave it on the first option here. We rarely use the remote desktop services installation. So we're going to either install role-based or feature-based installation. Click Next. Here you can see that there is only one server on the network, and this is the only one we want to configure. So we'll just click on Next. Now this is the important screen. It's giving us a number of server roles that we can choose from. In the previous video, we've already installed Active Directory domain services. Now, about 1/3 of the way down, you can see that there's a DHCP server. That's the one what we want to check on. You can see that it's asking, do you want to install the tools as well? We do. So we'll just click on Add Features. And it's saying, okay, got it. It's checked off and clear now. So we can click on Next. We're not going to add any additional features at this point, so we're just going to click Next. And it's saying DHCP things you should note. We're just going to click on Next. And it's asking us, do we want to restart automatically if required? We don't, because we're going to configure it. So we'll leave that unchecked and click Install. You can see that the progress bar is going along the top here. We could close this window and it'll continue to install, but I like to just wait until the install is done so that I'm sure that it's completed. It just takes a minute or two. Okay, it says configuration required, installation succeeded. We can close this window. Now there's two things that have changed. One, you can see that DHCP now appears on the left hand side here, and it's showing an exclamation mark up top. So we're going to click on the exclamation, say complete the configuration. And this isn't really not the configuration of DHCP, but we do need to authorize the installation of it. So we're going to click on Next. And it's saying, well, we need to know who's authorizing this installation. Okay, it's got administrator as a default. That's fine. That's what we want. We're going to click on Commit. And it says done. Great. So we can close, and you can see now there's no more red flag. Everything's clear. These are just notices that we can close so that it's clear. Now we want to go to our DHCP tab. You can see our server is once again there. We want to right click on our server and left click on DHCP Manager. Once again, alternatively, you can go to Start, Admin Tools, and DHCP should be in that list if you successfully installed it. But I'm just going to right click DHCP Manager. Now everything's scrunched up and a little bit hard to read. So what we're going to do is maximize this screen. Then we're going to expand out this panel. Move it out a good distance so you've got plenty of space here. Now we're going to expand out this chevron. Now we can left click on it, or we can double click on the server. And you can see that it's coming up with either IPv4 settings or IPv6 settings. We're not concerned about IPv6 at all at this stage, so we're going to click on IPv4. There are some folders that are appearing, which we're going to get into, but first we're going to do our configuration. So right click on this IPv4 and a submenu pulls up. We're most concerned about this one here, new scope. Left click on that and it comes up with a new scope wizard. Click next, give it a name. Doesn't matter what name, I'll just call it scope 1. You don't need to give it a description, it's not important. Just click next. This is the most important screen of the scope, and that is to make sure that you have the right subnet and the right host numbers in here. So in this example, I'm using 192.168.3 as our subnet. So all these numbers have to be 192.168.3. In your network, it might be 192.168.1, it might be 192.168.0, it might be 10.1.1, it might be anything else. But in this example, I'm using 192.168.3 as the subnet. The last octet is the host numbers. How many host numbers do you want? Where do they start? Where do they end? So we know our server is 5. We know our gateway is 2. So I don't want those in the scope. So I'm going to start with 10. And then I'm going to hit the tab button. When I hit tab, it's going to populate the subnet mask below, which is fine. Now I'm going to type in the end address 192.168.3 dot something. That something cannot be greater than the number of this octet. So this octet is only 1 to 255, but we can't use a number of them. We can't use a number of these numbers as the octet. So we can't put in 255 here. We can't use the highest number. And it's not good practice to use 254 either, because some network administrators use that as their gateway. So I would advise keeping it down to, say, 250. That's a good range for most network settings. So you want to go from 10 to 250. That leaves a few numbers in the beginning that aren't used and a couple numbers at the end that aren't used, which is great. We're not going to change our subnet mask. We're going to leave it at the class C that you're seeing here, or a CIDR 24. We're going to click on next. And here we would do an exclusion. Now, if you knew a number of servers that were already in that range, maybe you had some sort of device, TV or whatever that had that IP address already, you could exclude that number by going 192.168.3 dot, say, 100. And we could add that number in here if we wanted to. It's good practice to make sure that any IPs that are currently being used, to exclude them. In this case, I'm not going to do that, but it's certainly advisable to put the server IP address in there if it's in the range. For now, I'm just going to remove it, and I'm not going to have one. But you can. Click on next. The lease is the number of time, how long those machines or those devices will keep the IP address. If they're on the network, if they leave the network, if you take a mobile phone and you remove it from the premise, it's going to let you keep that lease for this amount of time before it releases the IP address. You can see the default is 8 days, and that's a bit of a long time. So I like to move it down to one day. If it doesn't see the device every single day, it will release the IP address and potentially give that IP address to another device. Now, you could set it to 1 hour, but that's a bit aggressive. So 8 days is a bit too long. 1 hour is a bit too short. 1 or 2 days is pretty good. So this is kind of the happy medium I like to use, is 1 or 2 days. Click on next. Now, it's going to say, do you want to configure some options? We do, because we're not done configuring all of our settings. So we're going to say yes. Now it's the router. Let me just go back to our drawing for a moment. And in the router, in the drawing, you can see that I've got a router here. Whenever these hosts are accessing stuff internally, that's fine. They can go from host to host. But if they need to go to the internet, they need to go out their gateway. So all these machines need to be aware of this gateway address here. So it gets that address from this DHCP server. When this host gets turned on, it asks the DHCP server, what's the gateway? The DHCP server returns and says the gateway is 192.168.3.2. It says, great, whenever I access the internet, I'm going to go out this way. So that's this is the setting we need to put on here. So I'm going to go 192.168.3.2. That's our gateway. Your gateway might be a .1 or it might be a .254. That depends on if you're in a virtual environment or if you're at home or a corporate environment. So this gateway is dependent on what you have. We're just going to click on next. This is if we want to parent the domain with some other domain. We're not doing that. We're just going to click on next. This is WinServer. This is a legacy way of resolving host names. We don't use this anymore, so we're going to click on next. Now it's saying, do we want to activate? We're done, but we could say no and just save all the settings. We're not sure. If we're not sure the settings are right, or we're not sure we really want to get machines up and running, we could say no and it saves everything. But in this case, we do. We want to get it up and running right now. So we want to leave it on yes, click next, and finally finish. You can see that the screen changed and it's added a scope under IPv4. If you click on that scope, a number of folders appear in it, and under the address pool, you can see the range of IPs that we've put in, 10 to 250. That's the address range for distribution. If we get on to leases, this is blank because no machines have connected to the network to get one of these IP addresses yet. But as they come on board, this will automatically populate with all the leases that are currently active. If we go to reservations, we don't have any. Scope options, this is important. So we just put in the router, which is 3.2. If you double click on it, you can change it if you made any mistakes. Our DNS server. So this is the DNS settings that our internal hosts will use. You want to make sure that it's pointing to the local DNS server first. The order in this box is very important. If it's out of order, let's say 8.8 is on top, that would be incorrect setting. We do want these settings, but we want 8.8.8.8 to be the backup. So we're going to move it down so that it's not the first one. We want to make sure that there's at least 2 in here. That's our local DNS. That's our forwarder. And we could add additional forwarders in here. It's perfectly fine to do so. If you have, if your ISP has a DNS, then you can add it here. That's fine. So mine's set up correctly. I'm just going to click cancel. The DNS name is already set. We don't want to change anything else. Now, there are a number of other settings we could add in here, but that's not the scope of this tutorial. So that's it for this tutorial. If we go to our dashboard, we now see that our ADDS is installed, our DHCP is installed and working, our DNS is installed and working, and we have a successful server environment. So I hope that's been helpful for you. I hope that's been educational, and there are more videos to come. Thank you for watching.